Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me 320 SimPilot, and today we have a full cold and dark through to takeoff tutorial for you in the PMDG Boeing 777-300ER. I am a real-world airline pilot. I currently fly the Boeing 787 and am type rated on the Boeing 77 as well as a result of that, and hopefully I can use that to bring some extra context to your home simulations. This is going to be a full tutorial with all the details and everything you need to get you from cold and dark to takeoff, even if you've never flown the Boeing 777 or indeed any Boeing before, and especially those of you coming from the Airbus, which I know of course a lot of you will be. This is a remarkable simulation of a very complex but fantastic aeroplane, a hugely popular, heavy, long-range and modern aircraft, so this is a really exciting thing to be able to simulate in Microsoft Flight Simulator. We're going to start from here at London Heathrow and get this airplane set up and ready for a flight to Cape Town in South Africa. Right, let's get started. Here we are on the flight deck then, cold and dark. Now, the PMDG 777 by default will load up powered on, which is the most common way you'll find a long-haul aircraft. It is not normal to come to a long-haul airplane and find it cold and dark. They don't like it. There's too many complicated systems and cooling and all sorts of things running, and it takes a bit of time to get them warmed up and ready to go, especially on long sort of ETOPS flights with all the verification needed. So nearly always the engineers would have come to the airplane before you and set everything up to the point that it's powered on at least. However, of course, in Flight Simulator, I know it's very popular for us to do the cold and dark. We like the satisfaction of knowing that we understand the airplane enough to get it to that point, and I completely agree with that, and that's why we're going to run through this today. But like I say, a rare procedure to have to do. So it makes sense that the PMDG by default will load up with everything running. Now, if it does that and you want to get to cold and dark, you need to go into the CDU down here, and you'll go to the menu and then PMDG actions, and then load the cold and dark state. I'll show you that later on in the video, but yeah, so that's how you get to this panel state. So in the CDU, get to your menu page, which you can see is here, menu, and then PMDG, and then panel state, load cold and dark. And you can do cold and dark with GPU or without GPU. That's the electrical ground power unit outside. So I've done it with GPU, so we have available lights on the two ground power units. You can actually see those. That's these yellow cables here. That's pretty normal. The airplane would normally have ground power available, but if not, you don't have to have that. We will use the APU if you need it. So first of all, you arrive on the airplane and you want to have done a bit of sensibility check. Is everything looking right? Is the gear lever down? Are the throttles at idle? Master switches off? And things like that. And then we're going to go into the electrical power up of the airplane. To do that, we come to the overhead panel and we're going to turn the battery on. And now that brings the airplane to life. You'll get the first few signs now that there is power. So things like seeing the brake pressure accumulator come to life. Next, we're going to check the C1 and C2 primary pumps are off. These are hydraulic pumps and they are electric on the center system, which is the main system of the 777. We want to make sure they're off so that when we power up the airplane, nothing moves inadvertently, like cargo doors, landing gear doors, flight control surfaces. You can see them drooping on the outside here, which is because it's depressurized, so they just hang down under their own weight. So make sure those are off. Then the demand pumps should be off, which are down here, so those are all off. Otherwise they would potentially run. Wiper selectors off, left and right off, landing gear lever down, and alternate flaps off. It's important that this is off as well, because this is an electrical system and could run if it was left on for any reason. And that again could damage something around the aeroplane. Once we've done all that, we go to the electrical panel, make sure the bus ties are both in auto, which they are, and now we've got primary external power. I'm going to turn it on, and secondary to external power on as it's available, and there we go. Now if you didn't have these available, all you would do is quite simply check that the APU generator switch is on, which it is, and then you can just start the APU. So either turn both of these switches on or turn the APU on. To turn it on, and I'll do that now with you, you go on, start, and then it flicks back to on, and now it's starting up. Now the airplane is alive, but it will take a moment for things to settle down. The screens don't come on for quite a while. This is going to be slow to those of you used to the Airbus. Short-haul airplanes are a little more accepting of this style of cold and dark procedure, but there we go. So that is the airplane now powered up, and eventually this stuff will come to life. You can see down here, by the way, if you want that panel state, you go menu, just brighten up a bit. It might take a while to brighten up. Menu, PMDG, and setup, and then panel state, load, and there's cold and dark GPU. So there you go. Good. So we're just going to let the airplane settle down a little bit and wake up as the power starts getting sent around to all the systems. PMDG have done this accurately to reflect what the real aircraft would do and how long it would take it and the screens and so on to power up. Now, whilst we're waiting for the screens to come to life, what I can do is go, and there you go, starting to run their sequences. We can come to the overhead panel and move all the way up to the back, and you'll see up here we just want to make sure that all these switches are in the normal position, so just closed and normal. Cargo temperature is in the aft and bulk low position, just to give some flow to those, and then everything else is in its normal closed and off position, which it should be by default. Next, we're going to look down and make sure that no circuit breakers have popped while we're powering up the airplane, and then we can turn on the voice recorder down here, so that goes into the on position. Not something we have on the 787. Lots of things here are quite different to that. So you come down to this brake accumulator underneath the PFD. This is showing you that there is pressure in the accumulator which can be used for braking in an emergency if we need it. So it's at just over 2000 psi. I've then got to check that the parking brake is actually set. If it isn't, set it by pressing your toe brakes and then moving this lever up, and then I come to the ICAS and I need to see parking brake set message. If that's not set, it means the airplane doesn't think it's applied the brakes properly. To check it, you can see here it's actually a white message, but it's hidden behind all these amber ICAS messages. So what I need to do is press cancel recall, and I can then get that scrolls to the next page. You can see page 2 now, and then I can see parking brakes set. So I press it again, then all clear, press it again, back to the original. So there we go. Good. So now we have some life in the airplane. We have our screens, and we have the brake pressure, so that's all good. Next, I'm going to check the oxygen mask. So I'm going to, again, looking at this little MFD control panel, I'm going to press stat, and then that'll bring the status page down here, and I can see crew pressure. We have enough oxygen, 1850 psi. And you would also run a test. Now this isn't simulated as far as I can tell, because you have to hold this down and run the test for a while, and then you just check the pressure does move. But there we go. So that's good. We have enough crew oxygen. I'm also going to check we have enough hydraulic quantity. So hydraulic left, center, and right all have good quantities: 0.96, 0.95, 0.99. And I'm going to check the engine oil by pressing the engine page, and then down here we have the engine page shown on the lower MFD, and I can see oil quantity 25, 24, no warning messages, so that is more than enough. So there we go. So that's all looking good. We're going to also turn on the ADIRU. So this is the button up here. So you're used to IRS selectors probably from the Airbus and indeed the 787, but in the 777 we just have one button, ADIRU. Turn it on, please. And there we go. By the way, love the animation. You can see the way the cover over that flips round to show that it's on. Really nice. Good. Okay, now it's time to run through some flows. But just before we do that, I'm going to start getting the flight set up in the EFB. I'm going to go to Electronic Flight Bag and request data from SimBrief. If you have a flight plan loaded in SimBrief, you can simply do this and it loads in. So here's our route loading all the way down to Cape Town, a long old flight. But yeah, I think it's a really neat system. You can see our OFP, you can see how much fuel we need, which is going to be a lot, 97.2 tons block fuel, but there we go. And you can also go into your ground operations, and you could have this automated, if you like, automated ground ops, so you can plan the fuel and so on in there. But I'm not going to use that for today. I'm going to take you through it bit by bit so we know what we're doing. Good. So what we can also do is go into our overhead panel flows, which is probably what you're expecting to do next. So you start at the top and then move down the panel. So top, down, top, down, top, down, top, down. So we've already done the ADIRU. Thrust asymmetry compensation in case of an engine failure is auto, and the primary flight computers are in auto. Moving down, we've got electrical. The battery we have turned on and the APU is on. I'm going to turn on the galley and cabin power systems, not fitted to all airplanes, both of those. And then we've got the bus ties, and you can see that it's removed the secondary external power because the APU is running, and I can actually get rid of the primary one as well. So just press it until it says avail, and now it's gone, and we're on the APU. Next, the generator should be on and the drive should be on, and you'll have these caution lights because of course they're not running yet, along with the backup gen. Good. Then back to the top of this panel, voice recorder is on, emergency lights can go to arm, passenger oxygen off, and window heat on. Ram air turbine is closed, and the hydraulic panel, this is important, should be right and left engine primary pumps on. These are the normal hydraulic pumps that are just attached to the engine, and they spin when the engine spins, so that you have a fault light because they have no pressure because the engines aren't running. Then we have the center system has electric pumps to power itself normally. The center system is the biggest hydraulic system, but it's currently off because we don't want the airplane to pressurize. As we said earlier, it could move things outside and be dangerous. So those are in the off position with fault lights showing there's no pressure. Demand pumps are backup pumps that also turn on when there's extra demand on the system. Here we have the electric pumps for the left and right system, and then air-driven pumps for the center system. So the center system has 4 pumps in total available. So that it's very redundant airplane, designed to fly a long way from an airport, but has so many backup systems. Anyway, all should be off. No smoking on, seatbelts are off because we aren't fueled up yet, and then the lights as you wish. Now to set up the lights, you can turn the dome light all the way up if you like, which I might do a little bit, but the normal way to have this is have everything set up as it is, and then just have the master switch on by having that little button pushed in, and then this master brightness will control all the back panel lights and the screens and everything. Landing lights off as well. Up here, nothing to do. This is the APU fire bottle. We'll leave it in the don't touch it. Cargo fire arm switches should be off and discharge guarded. Then we go engine, starter panel, and the EC mode. These are in normal position, and the starter in normal position, auto start on. There's a lot of these switches they got rid of on the 787. Fuel jettison should be not armed, nozzles closed and pushed in for the fuel to remain switch. Fuel pumps should all be off at this stage. You can see that the left forward pump is on. That's because it's not on, sorry, but it is on, but we haven't turned it on. The reason it's running is because if we look at our fuel page, we can see that that pump is actually being used to supply fuel to the APU in the back of the airplane. So that makes sense. Anti-ice all in the auto position. The lighting, we would have nav, and if it's dark, you'd have logo lights on as well. Otherwise, that's all you need. The rest of these lights should all be off. By the way, one switch I didn't show you, camera lights, would also be off at this point in the daylight, on if you thought you were going to need it for taxi. Camera not functioning in this 777 at the moment. Air conditioning panel should all be auto and on, auto, that's all good. So this is different to the 787, pretty similar to the Airbus. Equipment cooling, of course, it should be on, temperature you set as you wish, but here's the air conditioning packs, both in auto, and they are both running because the APU is running and providing air. And you can see down here, what's quite nice is we don't have to turn the APU bleed air on or off, it's just in the auto position, and the engine bleeds are in the on position, but they're showing off because the engines aren't running, so that's correct. So everything should be pressed in and on this panel basically. Pressurization outflow, definitely want those in auto. Push in the manual switch for the landing altitude and make sure these valves are just in the neutral position, and that's it. Good, that's the overhead panel done. It's not too bad actually. For such a heavy big airplane, the systems are actually quite well put together. Next I'm going to run a flow, so we've done our oxygen test and I'm going to run through here so we can set up the PFD as we wish using the EFIS control. I'll do that later once we've set up our departure. And along here we can turn the flight directors on. We've got the auto throttle arm both up in the on position, not down, they should be up. Speed is going to come later. Autopilot disengage bar should be up. Bank angle of the sector in auto, and you can put the heading of the runway you're expecting to depart from. But again, you don't need to do this until you've got your clearance really. I'm just going to spin it round, probably departing runway 27. Good, and then the first altitude you're expecting to stop at, and you can put it, most people will have it actually in the 1,000 position. If you have it in auto, you end up scrolling through hundreds, but most people have it in thousands, and then there you go. Good. And obviously the first officer would do the same on their side. Moving down, you would make sure that your heaters and lights are set as you wish. Make sure none of these buttons are pressed. We've already discussed the brake accumulator pressure, and the inboard display should be set to the ICAS, which is what it is here as normal, but you could change it around to be the MFD or another nav display as you wish, but we'll have it on ICAS. Heading reference should be in normal because true would be used for flying around polar regions typically. Sorry, there we go. Inboard display should be set to MFD. ICAS is this display here. So there we go. MFD or nav or PFD. So I'm going to set it to nav, which is one of the normal systems. Good. Over here we have ground proximity. None of these buttons should be pressed. Gear lever down. Alternate gear switch should be closed. Don't touch it. Auto brake can go to RTO. And then we're looking down at our lower MFD. So I can press, and there's a good way to remember that is once you have the auto brake to RTO, it points down at that screen. I'm going to go to checklists, resets, reset all. This system is central to the 777's operation using electronic checklists. So you can see this little pink cursor. This is actually, it's not a touchscreen, it's being done by this trackpad here and this click button. So you can move which screen it's interacting with, but we have it on the lower center, which is the screen we're going to use for the checklists. And yeah, reset all. And that way, any checklists that are left over, it just gets it ready for the start of a flight. Good. You would also at this point go to the com page and you would go into manager and set up your masters and reset it and start setting up your ACARs for the company. We're not going to talk about that today, but that's what you do there. Oh, didn't mean to do that. So there's a click spot here to move the EFB around, and I need to remember how to get rid of it. There it is, because you can actually have the EFB move, but I quite like it there. Good stuff. Right, so that is up to the checklists. Then we move down, we make sure the speed brakes are retracted, not in the arm position or anything. They should be up. Throttles should be closed in the idle position, flaps should be up. The pitch trim alternate is just in its neutral, parking brake is set, fuel control cutoffs off, stabilizer cutoff is in normal, so this is used to cut power to the stabilizer in case it runs away. The stabilizer is the big horizontal stabilizer back here, and it moves, the whole thing moves to trim the aeroplane in flight, and we don't want it moving when we don't want it to. Then we have the alternate flaps, as we already checked, they're off and off, not running, or not armed, and so on. Radios, we can choose to have VHF 1 on, and you would choose to transmit on it and listen on it, and then you can type your frequencies up here. That's if you're using VATSIM or anything like that. Transponder is should be in the standby position at this stage, and there we go. Fire bottles obviously pushed in, no fire test to do. Rudder trims at 0, aileron trims at neutral. Now, whilst we were doing all that, we would expect one of the pilots to go and do the walk around, and one of the pilots to set up the CDU. So here we go. This is actually quite a straightforward thing to do on the Boeings. I quite like the system they've come up with. Let me just get the dome light on, make it as bright as possible in here. In fact, if we press Storm, that would actually turn on all the lights and the dome lights on full brightness. So that's quite a handy way just to have it bright when you want it. That's designed for in case you're in a thunderstorm and there's lightning, so you don't get dazzled by the bright lights. So this is on the menu page by default, and of course you can go into FS actions and set up your fuel and so on, and the cabin lights, things like that, but we're not going to worry about that for now. We're going to treat it like the real airplane. And also here's the setup where you could go through all your different aircraft options and so on if you want to change anything. We'll talk about that in a future video. The airplane as it is absolutely fine, but if you want to have things like the different equipment loaded on, or if you want to have units in kilograms instead of pounds like I would, then that's found in here. So I would go into there and change that if you're flying in Europe, because that's what you expect to have, fuel in kilograms. But normally we'd go into FMC. Nav data out of date, apologies, I need to update that, but there we go, and it wants enter inertial position, that's fine. So you interact with this just like many FMSs and CDUs. It's no surprises in here, it's a very traditional system. So ident, check that you've got the right model, the right engine rating, and the right database, and then the correct drag and fuel flow factors. These will be adjusted by the airline to make sure that that aeroplane is matching what's expected from it, so if an airframe is more draggy or not. Position in it, we're going to put in our reference airport. We are at Heathrow. Now most airplanes these days remember their last position, so this is the correct position up here, because it's basically at Heathrow, but we're at the actual exact stand, so it's more accurate. It also matches the GPS position. So I'm going to take the GPS position and put it into the set inertial position, and that will allow the airplane to align the Adiru. Next we go to route, and I'm going to go route request. In here I have SimBrief route, EGLL to Cape Town. Press, and you can see it has the alternate, it has the flight level, the cost index. I mean, how good is this? It's a really neat system. I like it a lot. Got a 0 fuel weight, block fuel. So what I can do is say set payload, and it sets it. And fuel, we currently have 9.1 tons aboard, but if I press set fuel, 97.2 tons is loaded on. Then I'm going to go to select route, and it's requesting it. It's a long route, so it's taking a while to download. So I'll just leave that for a minute. Oh, sorry, it's requesting it. There we go. Route uplink ready, perfect uplink, so it's all coming through, and the winds as well. So there we go. EGLL to FACT, Manta 222, and the route is going to be loaded. So let's load that. It's a big route, so it could take a while. Long haul routes are pretty massive. Also, of course, we can we have our EFB over here showing us the route, and we can go to our charts and we can pick up our departure and choose that for us today. So actually, let's see what route it wants us to do. So it's got the wind data uplink, perfect uplink. Okay, good. So the route is now in, and if we press next page, you'll see the route there. It's going via Maxit, so Maxit departure. So I'm going to choose Heathrow, Maxit departure. There we go, heading off to the south, which makes sense to go down to South Africa. So we'll take off from runway 27 left. So that's all in. So you can see that the route does not load a departure automatically, it just has the first waypoint. So that's how I knew I need a Maxit departure. Scrolling through, you would check this against your flight plan and make sure it all is correct. So that's there, and if you go to your EFB, you can go to your OFP and you could check through that route yourself if you wanted to. The easiest way would be on this bit here, route. So we would definitely check that. But it looks good. Going to activate, and then you get this white light. You must also execute it. So activate and then execute. Otherwise, it isn't saved. Good. So this is taking us through it. Remember, we're just following the buttons at the bottom. So there's the route, but now I need a departure arrival. So I need to press this departure, and we know we're going to take off from 27 left, Maxit 1 Golf. And again, I've done it. It appears here in the white dashed line on our navigation display, but now I have to press execute and it will go magenta. Now it's absolutely set in there. So back to route, and there you go, that's all looking good. But next we can go through to perf init. So bottom right is taking us through to the next page, perf init. And this is where we can start to load up some of our performance. Now we're not going to do that just yet because we haven't calculated anything else, but what we can do is load in our zero fuel weight. Now the PMDG, helpfully, you can just press on it and it puts it in the bottom, 198.1, and if we check the flight plan, zero fuel weight 1981 was what we expected, so that's correct. So put that into there. It calculates the fuel figure. We don't type it in, it calculates it, 97.1. It's taking it from the sensors, gives a gross weight of 295.2, and it's already loaded in our cruise level from SimBrief. Look at that, 330, because it's quite low cruise levels initially on the 777-300 for a long flight. It's a heavy airplane, so it can't go straight up to the high levels like the 78 can. It's got a lot of cargo and fuel. So 330, cost an X87, minimum fuel temperature, that's when it will give you a warning, and cruise of 7.5 CG. It's also got perf init data, so I like all of that, so I'm going to accept it. And that's typed it in large. When it's small, it wasn't accepted yet, so there we go. Next, thrust limits. This is all being done as part of our performance, and takeoff, all done as part of our performance. So just to refresh, you come to a CDU, you go to the FMC, and you'll be on the ident page. This is where it will start. If you want to get there, you press menu, FMC, and ident. Then you can just follow through on the bottom right. You go to pos init, you tell it the position. If you have the airplane powered up, it may already know the position and you don't need to type it in like that. Then you go to route, you load in your route. If you don't have one on SimBrief, you simply type in your departure runway, your departure airport and your destination, your flight number, and then you need to go to next page, because you can see at the top we're on page 1 of 6. You would go next page, and then you can just type in your route all the way through. This one I've loaded from SimBrief, but you would just type in the waypoint and the airway on the left as you want to, all the way through. Then you go to departure arrival, and you put in the departure runway and the departure standard instrument departure you're expecting to fly. And remember, you activate and then you press execute. Once you've done that, you're onto the takeoff ref page and the thrust limit page, which are part of our performance. If you get lost and you can't find, let's say you're pressing the legs page and you're checking through the departure, and then you want to go and find your performance for takeoff, you just press init ref and it will take you back to the takeoff ref by default at this stage, and then you've got takeoff ref 1 and 2. So these are takeoff ref 1 and 2, and then this is the thrust limit page. This is what we'll talk about in just a moment. It gets a little bit complex to takeoff performance on the Boeing, I think, but there we go. So it's time then to run our takeoff performance. Press to home, we go to performance tool, and we can import all the information from the flight plan. if we want. But I think what's more useful, frankly, is choosing what we're going to do, because the flight plan doesn't know the runway you're actually going to use, especially if you're on VATSIM or something like that. So runway 27 left gives us the heading, the slope, the runway length. You can just click on the units, by the way, to change it to meters, which I really like. And you can choose whether you want it dry, wet, or contaminated. So it's definitely dry today. It's actually a lovely day to be flying. Down in the aircraft, I can again import from the OFP or from the aircraft. So I've already set up the airplane with the fuel we wanted and the weights. So I'm going to just import from the aircraft, loads in our actual weight, and the fuel and the configuration. Anti-ice is off because it's not cold, but if it was, you could choose to have the engine anti-ice running. Very rare to take off with engines and wings. But yeah, so that's off for us today. If it was below 10 degrees and there was visible moisture, we would have the engines on. Aircraft air conditioning config is going to be auto, i.e. we're going to have the packs in the auto position, which is what we've got up there right now. By the way, as the fuel is now on, I'm going to put the seatbelts to on. You can hear them ding. Next we import the weather, because we are, let me just check, we are using live weather. We are indeed. So we can import the weather, and there is the wind. So northerly wind 27 degrees, QNH is 1016, and we hit calculate. It's very quick. So this gives us our information along the left side here, and let's go and load it in. So remember, for the takeoff stuff, we've already loaded in. We went through ident, we did pos in it, we loaded in the route, whether you type it in or load it from SimBrief. Then we've gone to takeoff, and we're on the takeoff reference page. What we've also done, of course, is if I was to go to index, and remember that's another way to get back to things. If you are on the initref page, you can just index and get to this page, and in perf, this is where we've loaded in our zero fuel weight and our cruising level and things like that. Thrust limit, takeoff. So it will take you through the perf page by default as you go through it the first time, but then it hides it a little bit. So what we need to do is enter this information across. So let's do it. Acceleration height 1500 feet. That will be on takeoff ref to page 2 of 2. Engine out acceleration height 800 feet, acceleration height 1500 feet. So that's all good. Flaps 5. So now we go to takeoff ref 1 of 2, which is the most important page, and we put in flaps 5 in the top there. Next it wants a percentage M1 of 92.3, rating takeoff 2. So we're going to derate the engines. To do that, we go to thrust limits, takeoff ref, takeoff 2. So you press that, it arms climb 2 as well. This just means the engines won't go to full power, so they're going to be slightly reduced by 20%. So we're on takeoff 2. Next is cell temp 37 degrees. So in the top left, I'm going to type in 37. So we have 37, which gives an N1 of 92.3%, which matches the N1 up here. Trim 5.61. That's actually a unit that will go down here, so we'll do that later. We'll go back to the takeoff page, and what I will do now is type in our CG, which was 26.6. So 27 goes into CG, which gives the 5.5 units trim. Runway 27 left is correct, and now the speeds. We have 171 V1, 175 VR, 178 V2, 171, 175. Now you can see these reference speeds here are already there, but those are just from a database. They're just a error check. V2 178. Good. Next, takeoff gross weight. You can't always enter that. It depends on the fit of the airplane, but this one we can. It's 295.3, so I'll put that in. Actually 295.2 because we burnt a bit of fuel. Oh. Ah, right, okay. So I'm not used to this because, yeah, I've not seen the way they've done this before. So that's a good lesson. If you type in the takeoff gross weight into there, you need to have done the speeds first. So 171, 175, 178, 171, 175, 178. You can, of course, just select them if they match, like I have done there, but there we go. So once it's set up, you should have this. You should have this page with the flaps, the thrust setting, and the derate if you want to. You can keep it simple and just use one of those, but that's how you would select it. Remember, when you're looking in here, when it says rating takeoff 2, you go to the thrust limit page to select takeoff 2 and your selected temperature up here, 37 degrees in this case, which is just reducing thrust, which is what you would do on the real airplane, so it is good to do it. Then we've got our CG giving a trim unit, which we'll set later on, and then we have our speeds on there. So that's pretty much complete. Now I want to come up to the glare shield and put the V2 into that window. So V2 is 178, so let's put 178 into here. That's because that will then appear correctly. What's going on there? Never seen that before. There we go, 178. That would be now blue. That's our target speed on the PFD. We've loaded in our departure, so I'm going to put lateral navigation armed, which would be in white down there, and vertical navigation armed in white underneath there, and then the active modes are toga and toga. Our SID stops at 6,000 feet, so we'll stop at 6,000 feet, runway heading 279, and the flight directors are all on. Good. Right. So that's all done. It's a little bit confusing, I can see that. So hopefully you can see me maneuvering this enough in this video to get your way around the pages. But essentially you start at init-ref, run through all the pages, and now we just sweep up. We've done the performance. You just check the VNAV, check it has a transition altitude correctly, 6,000 feet. You would check the NavRad if you wanted to tune any navigation aids, but I wouldn't. I'd leave them in the auto position, so green with that little A means it's automatically tuning. I'm going to go to the legs page, and now you can just check through that your departure is correct. To do that, set your little EFIS control to plan, zoom in a little bit if you haven't, and then you can just press step at the bottom right. The step option will only appear if you set plan up here. And now you can step through and check it is all correct. And you can also, by pressing legs, it will always return you to the first page of the legs. You can see in magenta the next restriction, so above 3,000 feet is the restriction it wants to make. Good. Right, let's put this back to our map and let's turn on what we'd like. Don't press weather radar, we don't want to turn that on yet, but I will have airports turned on. I'll have terrain on for now. Actually no, we'll turn that off, you turn it on later really. So yeah, just have the airports, and I'm going to have traffic turned on so I can see other airplanes on the TCAS when the time comes. If you press center, you'll get the circular view, which can be useful if you're doing things like this, pointing the wrong way to see what's going on behind you. Your minimums we're not going to set until later, but over here we're going to set our QNH. So Barrow, I'm going to click across to hectopascals, and then I can set the QNH correctly. 1016. There we go. You can also choose to show VOR needles if you want. So I'm going to have the left VOR showing by moving this little needle up, and then it shows down here VOR L London. So that's now going to point at the VOR, the London VOR. If I were to go to center, we should see it. There it is. The green arrow is that VOR pointing at London. Good. Now, as you can see, this airplane is not quite ready to go. The fuel is still attached, the stairs are still attached, they're doing cargo loading as well. So we need to now get rid of all the ground equipment because we are almost ready to go. So let's go down to the EFB, home, ground operations, ground service vehicles, and I'm going to release everything that needs releasing. So I can actually press release all and it will get rid of all of these. So let's do that. Door management, that should close up the doors automatically as well. Let's have a look. Yeah, there they go, doors closing up. Awesome, beautiful, beautiful animations on it. Should see that little pressurization panel pop close as well. Look at that, pop, brilliant, love it. Good, we're going to leave the doors to be automatically handled by the cabin crew. You can also, by the way, open up the avionics access, pretty cool. So we now want to go to, by the way, if you did have a lack of oil in the engines or hydraulics, you can just press refuel hydraulic fluid or refill engine oil in the ground maintenance tab. That's important to remember. Same for the brakes and tyres. You can see that we actually have some wear showing up as you look around the outside compared to my first video, which you'll remember. Hopefully I have an intro video available on the channel. You can see that we've got wear now on the forward brake hubs from the amount we've used them in the sim. Pretty cool, where the rear one gets used less often. So yeah, amazing. I wonder if the tyres have gained any wear as well. I was curious to see that, and the brake pins. As we get closer, you can hear the air conditioning packs running. So look at that. The hubs have gotten all grimy. That's awesome. Which is, they're always grimy on airplanes because the brake dust will obviously all over them. And as we move the camera around, yeah, we can see the tyres starting to wear down in the front ones, and how the brake pin's doing. Brake pin's wearing down here. Awesome. Awesome. We also need to release the ground power, because if we look outside, and it's quite a good idea at this point to look outside, we can see we still have chocks in place, and we have the ground power cable at the front, that yellow cable. So we don't want that. We're getting ready to go, so we'll release the ground power, and I'm going to remove the chocks. The plane is on the parking brake, so that's fine. You would normally have the tug attached before you release the chocks. The ground crew would make sure of that, but there we go. Good. So just having a look around the flight deck, let's make sure we've got everything set up as we want. First of all, I'm just going to check our chart. So there's our departure. We've loaded that in, and we've checked the route. We've got it on our nav display, and it's out and left and around we go. Low MSA. I'm not going to go through too much of a briefing for you today, but yeah, you would obviously brief out your chart. To taxi, we're going to have the airport taxi charts to get ourselves out to runway 27 left. There it is, and we are parked somewhere over here, so we go down and down to 27 left. Good. Right, you would also just make sure that your PFD looks sensible. So we've got the V1 speed, the V2 of 178, Toga is active, and LNAV VNAV armed, 6,000 feet our stop altitude, that's looking good. Red out, by the way, this is the radar altimeter showing -4 because the gear is compressed, so it's actually lower down. That's based on 0 when the airplane's in the air and the wheels are dangling, if that makes sense. So it would show a negative number on the ground, which is quite normal. Navigation display sets, engines looking in a good position, and warnings, we've got warnings that we would expect at this point. Now, I'm not 100% confident on this brake source light and why it's giving us a brake source warning. I think that will go when we pressurize the aeroplane, but that's a system. The 787 uses electronic brakes, so it doesn't have any of these accumulators and so on. So I'm not entirely sure about that, so we will check that in just a moment. Good. What we can do, however, is run through the checklist. As I said, electronic checklists are the key to this aeroplane. So we go to up here, checklist, and now it goes to the pre-flight checklist. Oxygen, tested, and 100%. So that means, have you tested it, which we did, and is it set to 100% in the middle, which it is. Flight instruments, we want to check that they're pointing the right way, so we have heading east, 090, which is correct, and we have 090, and we have 090 on the standby compass, so they all make sense. And the altimeter is showing 1016, 80 feet elevation, which is correct, 80 feet elevation, and the standby one as well. I'm going to put it to 1016. There we go. Tick. Pre-flight, and then you're looking for this green message. Checklist complete. Very, very important. Good. Once that's done, you don't need to press anything. You just press checklist again to get rid of it off the screen. And there you go. So that's the pre-flight checklist. And now we would get ready to call air traffic control and get the aeroplane ready to go. So we're pretty much there, but now we need to do what's called pressurizing, something you don't need to do on the Airbus. The Boeings, we pressurize first. So we said earlier the parking brake is hydraulic, the flight controls are hydraulic, but they're not working. If I move the flight controls now, nothing happens. So what we need to do is pressurize the airplane so that we have all the hydraulics available and so on for pushback. The 787, we do the same flow, but it doesn't actually make much of an impact. But here we go. So we start off, so you would speak to the ground crew and make sure that they're happy for you to pressurize, i.e. is all the equipment away from the airplane so things can start moving, gear doors, flaps and so on. Although the doors should be up, but there we go. So hopefully they would say, yeah, you're cleared to pressurize. And we go, thank you, and then we would do it. To do that, we're going to start on the hydraulic panel. We're going to go to the right electric hydraulic pump, and we're going to put it to, right electric demand pump, put it to auto, wait for the fault light to go out. It has gone out. We start at the right pump so that we don't accidentally transfer fluid to the other system. Bit of a strange setup, but there we go. So right electric to auto. Then we're going to turn on the electric pumps. There we go. And then we turn on the, so we're going a bit of a C shape. So the electric pumps are on. Then we turn on the left demand pump and the air pumps. Auto, sorry, not on, they go to auto. So they'll only run if needed. So now we have pressure being supplied to the hydraulic system. If we go to hydraulics, we can actually check that, although you don't need to. You can see here, the demand pumps are now supplying pressure to left and right, and the center system has its C1 pump running. So that's fine. These fault lights are fine. The reason the C2 pump has a fault light is because it does not run when the center 1 pump is available and running and turned on. These fault lights are because the engines aren't running, and now these are in auto, so their fault lights have gone. Good, so that's the setup we want for the hydraulic panel. Then we come to the fuel panel, we turn on all 4 pumps. You don't do the crossfeed at all, just the outer buttons, so left, forward and aft, right, forward and aft, on. Then, come down here and look at this ICAS. Does it say fuel in center? It does. So that means there's fuel in the center tank, because it's a long flight, so we would expect it. So we've got 34 tons of fuel in that center tank. So we need to therefore turn on the center pumps, just like on the 787. So they come on, little press lights, no problem at all. They sit there for a bit, and that message disappears, and now the center pumps will be running. Good. So we've done the hydraulic pumps and the fuel pumps. Next, we're going to go to the beacon and turn on the beacon. That's the red light on top and bottom of the airplane. You can see it now flashing. That is telling the ground crew that the airplane is about to move and engines may be starting soon. Then we go to recall. Check there's nothing unusual there. We have engine shutdown and TCAS off. That's all we need. On the 7.8 we would have a few more, but there we go. Engine shutdown, TCAS off. And then we come down to the transponder and put it to transponder, which alerts air traffic control that we're here. And they can see us now for the first time on the transponders or the radar screen. And finally, we're going to set the trim. So what trim do we want? Well, we have 5.5 trim position. So we look down on our trim and then just run your pitch trim. I'm running it now to 5.5. Should be inside that green arc on the left. That moves the stabilizer at the back into the takeoff position. Something that's interesting to note, I heard from a friend on the 777, is that if you did have the camera system, which we sadly don't at the moment, but if you did, even when you run that trimmer, those cameras are actually attached to the leading edge of this rear stabilizer. So when you trim, they move and have to readjust to make sure they're pointing in the right place at the back of the airplane. Pretty cool. Anyway, let's get rid of that. So once we've done the before start flow, we need to run the before start checklist. Flight deck door is closed and locked. Passenger signs are on. MCP, you want to check you have your V2 of 178, 178, and the heading track is set correctly for the departure, which our bug is set round onto the runway heading, and altitude 6,000. Takeoff speeds, we have V1 171, VR 175, V2 178. CDU pre-flight completed. Trim, we've set our 5.5 units. And taxi and takeoff brief complete. That is the before start checklist complete. And then we can call for pushback, and off we go. And that is it. The airplane is now pressurized. So we're ready for pushback. We would call air traffic control and get pushback clearance. Okay, so we've called air traffic control and been given that pushback clearance. So what do we do? Well, I'm going to just get the pushback starting. So connect the tug. I'm choosing Shift B today. Keeping it simple. Now the parking brake is an interesting thing on this airplane. It's set by pressing the toe brakes and then lifting this lever up. To disengage it, you simply, on the real airplane, would press the toe brakes down and this would disconnect. I'm using an Xbox controller for today's video, so it's going to be a little bit clunky. That's not because of the simulation. If you had your pedals, that would work better, but if you or a button assigned. But yeah, it's a bit fiddly, so I'm still learning my way on how to make it behave for what I want it to do. So tug's connected, we're cleared for pushback, let's go. So to do it, I'm going to release the parking brake, which, as I said, is done by releasing the brake pedals. There we go, and off we go. Airplane's pushing back. Now, in the 777-300ER, we're using the GE90 engines. We can only start one engine at a time. So we're going to do that now during the pushback to save time, which will be normal. We're going to start engine number, or the right engine first, this engine. The reason we do that is so that the aeroplane gets the brake accumulator pressure straight away. So to start the engine, we go onto the engine on the overhead, start right, put it to start, and then I'm going to bring up the engine display on the lower page, and then I'm going to put the fuel control on straight away. So you can just go, the real procedure would just be start and fuel control on, and you should have the engine secondary instruments displayed for the start, really. I think so anyway. On the 7.8 it would automatically display them. And that is now coming to life. Our huge monster engine, the largest engine on a commercial aircraft, most powerful. So there you go, you can see that the N2 is rising. Now, the engine is started when this little red line on the EGT disappears. That's when the engine is stabilised. So the EGT shouldn't go above that during the start. Let's just stop the pushback in a minute actually. So there you go, red line's disappeared and the EGT is reducing, so that engine's stable. Let's set the parking brake, let the tag disappear, and we can start the left engine. So overhead, start, fuel control on, and now the engine goes through its auto start process. You can see the N2 increases inside the engine. That's because this uses air to start, the 787 uses electricity, but there we go, it's driving the N2, which is the fan just behind this big one at the front. Driving it around, and then it's going to introduce some fuel shortly. So you'll see the fuel flow increase. Very noisy engines, by the way. These are famous. You can hear them all over an airport if one of these airplanes starts up with these engines. They make an almighty racket. Fuel flow on, expecting EGT to rise. There we go, we have light up. They're quite quick to start, but they do get going. And there you go, engine started. Now I noticed that I don't have the parking brake set message, which you should have. There it is, parking brake set. This is again to do with the way my Xbox controller is doing the parking brake system. So do be careful with that, the airplane isn't rolling forward. Engines are started. So now we go into our after start flow. Very straightforward. Engines both running, red lines disappeared. You also know because the starters are back in norm. So what do? Well, after start flow is very straightforward. We go to the electrical panel, check there's no amber lights. If there are, it means that electrical power has not transferred correctly to the generators on the engines. But it has, there's no amber lights, APU goes off. Then we're going to come to the anti-ice panel and check that they're all in the auto position, or engine anti-ice on if you want it because of those conditions we mentioned earlier, i.e. it's below 10 degrees and there's moisture outside like rain. So auto position. Then we come down and set our flap for takeoff. We're going with a flap 5 takeoff, remember, from our performance calculation. So flaps 5. There. Then we're going to press cancel recall and check the only caution is TCAS, which it is. And I'm going to get rid of the engine secondary on the secondary display down there. Good. Now once the ground crew is clear, which they are, and we're just sat here on the taxiway, we can run our flight control check. To do this, we simply move the flight controls deliberately in all directions. And this is done to make sure that everything's connected and free. It's a fly-by-wire system, so you are just commanding electronic control of most of the controls. There is actually a mechanical link to the stabilizer and to a pair of spoilers, but there we go. There you go, you can hear the pumps running in the cabin, just awesome. And look at the way the spoilers move in there the correct way. Fantastic. You'd also do the rudder. You have to hold the tiller still on the 777, which is mad, I think, but there you go. So left and right, you'd hold the tiller in the holding position to do that. Good. Okay, so now we've done our flight control check. We do the before taxi checklist. Anti-ice is in auto, recall is checked, we just have our TCAS. Flight controls are checked, ground equipment clear, before taxi check is complete. Okay, let's get going. So you call for taxi, we know we're going to go right and then left to get over to the runway. All you do is turn the taxi light on. You could use the turn off lights if you think you need it at night. And then we release that parking brake again, the dreaded parking brake. My best success has been to release the parking brake and then hold the brake button if you have it signed to a button. That seems to work. Right, heavy airplane, bit of power to get it moving. There we go. And it is a long aeroplane, so you need to be careful taxiing it. It is huge. Taxi lights are on the nose gear, as you can see there. Now some cool features of the 777. 300 is that the rear wheels steer. So, oh, no, they shouldn't be there. As I do any strong steering on the nose gear, you'll see that the rear axle actually rotates. So look at the rear axle here. You can see it, and that increases the turn, reduces the turn radius and prevents scrubbing in those rear wheels. Very cool feature. Also, these black stripes here, these are designed so that when the flaps are down, the camera can, for the pilots, can actually, you can still tell where the main gear is. That runs along the outside of the main gear, so you know that you're clear of any grass or anything like that. Now, there's not a lot to do on the taxi on a Boeing long-haul aircraft. They're designed to have everything done, so we've already done our flight controls, unlike the Airbus. So what we need to do is simply check that there's no update, so any change to our takeoff performance, which could be from a change of intersection. Let's just use a bit of brakes here, slow it down. Below 10 knots for the, oh, that's a bit strong. Below 10 knots for any tight turns. You don't really taxi a long-haul Boeing over 20 knots, even in a straight line. Might even need a bit of power through the turns to keep it moving. So you've got to keep driving forwards. If I turn now, you'll see that we can drag those main wheels. So you keep driving forwards. Maybe not that much. There we go. Yeah, okay, maybe that's a bit too far, but yeah, you want to try and keep those main gears over that yellow line. Remember, I do not fly the Boeing 777-300ER in real life, so this is all new to me. In the 787, I've got my own references. And you can see here, even there, I've turned it a little bit tight, so we're not on that centre line. So it's all about managing those turns. Let's try another one up here, just to try and get that a bit better than that. So we're on the centre line here. That's all good. By the way, notice the tail skid removed from newer 777-300s because the fly-by-wire system does have tail strike protection. So we're doing 17 knots, that's a bit fast, so just dab the brakes. There we go. Right, I'm going to drive forwards. I want to make this turn. I'm going to do a left-right here. So drive forwards, and now I'm going to begin the turn. And not, you don't want to go full lock unless you need it, but hopefully that's going to work out. Yeah, even that was a bit too much again. So actually a little less oversteering than I thought. It's going north. Let's try a bit more reasonable one here. Let's get ourselves onto the centre line, and then let's do a nice turn. There we go. That's more like it. You don't want that nose gear getting too close to the grass. But you see here, if I turn too quickly, I actually cut up onto the inside. So you have to manage the rate around the turn. You don't want to turn too sharply once you've begun your turn. But there we go. So no changes to our takeoff performance, no changes to our routing. I'm going to put the transponder to TARA down here, TARA, and that will remove that TCAS message. Some pilots will only do that when the cabin has told them that they're ready. And we're pretty much good to go. We've got our flaps, we've got our power setting. By the way, something else you can check, if you go to your performance tool, you can see here it says rating takeoff 2, cell temp 37, N1 92.3. So if I now look on the engine display, I can see takeoff 2, 37, 92.2, close enough. So you can see that it has got the performance information correctly. There's some awesome sounds on the flight deck. I can hear things rattling as we taxi along. Absolutely love that. Really nice. So let's talk about the takeoff. How do we take off in a Boeing 777? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to move the... It's quite straightforward. Power levers go up until we have 55% N1. We don't hold it on the brakes, so you just roll onto the runway, set the power levers or thrust levers to 55% N1, let them stabilize, and then push the toga button. To do that, you can just click on this little cross here, this little screw, but in the real airplane it's actually these buttons here, which you could also press. That will then drive the thrust levers up to our takeoff thrust of 92.2 N1. So it's that simple. That will then set the takeoff thrust. You'll have put a little bit of forward pressure on the yoke as you do that. The reason we do that is so that the airplane has a bit of weight on that nose gear as you're setting takeoff thrust. Because remember, thrust will actually push the nose of the airplane up because those engines are underneath the wing. Then we roll along at 80 knots, so you have a bit of forward pressure. 80 knots, you remove the pressure, stick to neutral. By the way, this is not talking about crosswind, we'll do that in a future video. Then as we get to V1, you can no longer reject the takeoff, and then at rotate, you then rotate the airplane. Now the airplane doesn't automatically call rotate, but I've got this one set up, and again in your menu, PMDG Setup, you can choose to have the voices loaded up and said by the other pilot. I'm not sure which menu it's in, but it is in there. So I've got that set, because in real life the other pilot would call you rotate. And then you're going to rotate the airplane gently towards 15 degrees of pitch. So on the PFD, little dot up towards 15. Look out initially to keep a sensible rotation rate, and then you can look in as the nose comes up high. Something to note about this is that the 777-300 will stand up on its main gear, so your tail clearance is limited. So you want to be gentle with that so that the airplane can raise the nose, and then it locks the gear axle so that it sits on that last truck as you're taking off. So you're going to be nice and gentle with it, but nothing too unreasonable. Then, when you're climbing away, you'll get positive rate. Going a bit fast here, slow it down a bit. You'll get positive rate, cool, and then you raise the landing gear. You'll now follow the flight directors as you climb up in toga mode, and then you'll get above the acceleration altitude. Don't worry, we'll talk through all of this as we go through in the takeoff. By the way, you will find when taxiing that the airplane will drag the nose gear very easily. You've got to have the speed under control, otherwise you'll turn and it just won't. You'll find the airplane just keeps going in a straight line and ignores what the nose gear is doing, because it's a heavy airplane with a lot of weight on the main gear but not much on the nose gear. 747 was famously easy to do that as well. Right, so we'll stop here and I'll set that brake. Good. So, taking off, just a quick refresh. We're going to set 55% N1, we're going to press that button and the engine will drive to takeoff thrust. We'll have a little bit of forward pressure on the yoke and accelerate along the runway. At 80 knots we'll release that forward pressure on the yoke and we'll check that we have thrust set, so the thrust should be at the right place over here. Then we'll carry on to a V1 when we can no longer reject, and then we'll get rotate call. So V1 is 171, rotate a couple of knots later, 175. So the call to rotate. We'll then gently rotate the nose up towards 15 degrees, positive rate, raise the landing gear. We'll then climb like that, following the toga flight director, the pink flight directors, up until we get to acceleration, and then they'll change, the thrust will change to climb 2, because that's what's armed, so it will reduce the thrust to the climb thrust setting, the derated climb thrust setting. We'll lower the nose, keep following the flight directors, you can engage the autopilot if you want, and then as you get above the green speeds, just like on the Airbus, you'll retract the flaps up to 0, and that's it, that's the takeoff. There are some other things to talk about in more detailed takeoff tutorial later, but that's the basics. If there's a crosswind, you simply use the rudder to keep the airplane straight, and you use a little bit of into-wind aileron to keep the wings level during the takeoff roll. Right, we're almost ready to go. Let's just run the takeoff checklist. Before takeoff checklist, flaps are at 5. Before takeoff checklist complete. Now we're going to line up. So I'm going to put on the landing lights left and right. I'm going to turn on the strobe lights. I'm going to alert the cabin crew with a bit of a ding. Not sure if that would work on the 777, maybe off and on, because we've got on the 78 a button that just chimes the cabin crew, really quite handy. Good. It's all clear out on the approach, all clear on the runway. Let's go. That's 1 step. 2 steps. Good. So, rolling takeoff, remember, we don't have to stop. The airplane doesn't spool up whilst under brake pressure. I'm also curious to see this stabilizer if it shakes and vibrates. Good stuff. You'll also notice there was no takeoff config test. That's because you don't do that on the long haul Boeings. So nice and gentle on the speed, get it below 10 knots, otherwise it will just drag that nose gear, and round we go. What a machine. Okay, we're lined up. Spool up the engines. 55 N1, a little bit of forward pressure. There it is. And press the cross. And you'll see thrust ref FMA, which means that the engines are driving towards the takeoff thrusts. There they go. 92 and 1, which is what we wanted. Thrust is set by 80 knots. Stick to neutral. We go to the hold mode, which is correct. It means that we now have control of the thrust levers, but we just leave them where they are. Keeping it straight with the rudder. Going to use a lot of the runway. We are heavy for this flight today. I've got to say, the handling on the ground of the PMDG is lovely. They've really nailed the feel. It doesn't twitch around too much. You can treat it like the real airplane. V1. Rotate. Gently now. Moving the nose gear up. Oh, that's a bit aggressive. That is because of the Xbox controller, I'm going to say. And we're going to raise the landing gear. Positive rate. Gear up. Pitch those flight directors. There's LNAV. Thrust ref VNAV speed. Comes in at 400 feet. And away we go. Yeah, that was not the correct rotation technique. We'll do another video on the takeoffs in the future. But now we can follow those flight directors. I can put it in the autopilot. Yeah, the controller was slightly heavier to unstick than I'd expected it to be. That's because of using the Xbox controller. So there's autopilot mode engages, and we come around the turn. We're through 1500 feet. Climb 2 now activates, and the thrust will reduce to climb 2. And now we have to accelerate. Once we're above the flap 5 speed, I can bring the flaps to 1. So we're above 5, accelerating, flaps to 1. And then we will repeat that. You can see the magenta bug is below the green up speed, but that's no problem. It's because of the flap limiting speeds. So we'll get above the 1, and now bring the flaps up. And now the airplane will move that target speed higher to 250. There we go. So the gear is up, the flaps are up, we are accelerating and climbing away. How cool is that? Coming up 6,000 feet now, we're in thrust ref LNAV VNAV speed, so the airplane will fly this departure, it will fly up and level off at 6,000 feet according to the departure, and it will maintain the speed because it will revert to speed mode when it gets to the level off. So in the next tutorial, we'll go through how to fly the airplane in the climbs and the descents and how the vertical modes work. And then we'll do another tutorial on flying the approach and landing. So we'll take you all the way through, up to the cruise, and then back down again to the approach and the landing. So there you have it, that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully that's given you an idea of how to get this airplane from cold and dark up into the takeoff. And yeah, it's a fascinating machine. Lots more videos and guides and tutorials to come on the channel, so do please subscribe if you'd like to see those. We'll see you in another video or live stream. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.